The blood on the snow was what caught Lucas Whitmore's attention first. A crimson trail leading through the pine trees like some terrible breadcrumb path in a fairy tale gone wrong. It was January of 1884, and the Montana Territory was locked in the grip of the worst winter anyone could remember. Lucas had been riding for 3 days straight from Gila Bend, Arizona, where he'd been working cattle for the past 6 months, heading north to visit his brother in Helena before the mountain passes became completely impassable. The journey had already taken longer than expected, with snowdrifts reaching up to his horse's chest in places. And now this. Blood in the snow always meant trouble, and Lucas had seen enough trouble in his 32 years to know he should probably keep riding. But he didn't. Something in his gut told him to follow that trail, so he dismounted from his bay mare, Copper, and led her carefully through the trees, his rifle ready in his free hand. The blood wasn't much, just drops here and there, but it was fresh enough that it hadn't frozen solid yet. That meant whoever was bleeding had passed through recently, maybe within the last hour or two. The trail led him to a small clearing where the snow had drifted high against a fallen log. At first, he thought it was just another snowbank, but then he saw the edge of fabric, dark blue calico peeking out from beneath the white powder. His heart lurched in his chest as he rushed forward, dropping to his knees beside what he now realized was a person, nearly buried in the snow. He brushed away the accumulated powder with urgent hands, revealing a young woman curled on her side, her face pale as the snow itself. She wore nothing but a thin dress and a shawl that had done precious little to protect her from the elements. No coat, no proper boots, just worn leather shoes that were soaked through. Her dark hair was plastered to her head, wet and frozen in places, and her lips had taken on a bluish tinge that made Lucas's stomach drop. "Madam," he said, keeping his voice gentle as he checked her neck for a pulse. It was there, thank God, faint and slow but steady enough. "Madam, can you hear me?" She didn't respond. He could see now where the blood had come from. Her hands were torn and bleeding as if she'd been climbing or crawling through rough terrain. There were scratches on her face, too, thin lines that had scabbed over. Lucas had seen hypothermia before. He'd lost a good friend to it back in the winter of '78. He knew he had maybe minutes to get her warm, or she'd slip away entirely. Working quickly, he shrugged out of his heavy sheepskin coat and wrapped it around her, then gathered her into his arms. She was light, too light, her body cold as ice even through her clothes. "You're not alone," he said softly, more to himself than to her as he carried her back to where Copper waited patiently. "I've got you now. You're not alone." Getting her onto the horse while unconscious was no easy feat, but Lucas managed it, mounting up behind her and holding her against his chest to share what body heat he could. He'd passed an old trapper's cabin about 2 miles back, abandoned by the look of it, but still standing. It was the closest shelter, and shelter was what they needed. Copper seemed to understand the urgency, picking her way back along their trail with careful steps. Lucas kept talking to the woman, a steady stream of words meant to pull her back from wherever she drifted. "Stay with me now. We're going to get you warm and safe. Just hold on. Hold on for me." The cabin appeared through the trees like an answer to a prayer, its roof sagging but intact, smoke-stained stones of a chimney promising a fireplace inside. Lucas dismounted carefully, keeping the woman secure in his arms, and kicked the door open. The interior was dim and dusty, but it was out of the wind, and that was what mattered. He laid her down on the rough wooden floor and immediately set about building a fire. There was old wood stacked against one wall, dry enough to catch quickly, and soon flames were crackling in the hearth. The cabin began to warm, and Lucas turned his attention back to his patient. Her clothes were soaked through, which meant they had to come off or she'd never warm up properly. Lucas had been raised to be respectful of women, but he also knew that modesty wouldn't mean much if she died. Working as clinically as he could, he removed her wet dress and shawl, averting his eyes as much as possible, and wrapped her in his bedroll and spare blanket. Her skin was ice cold to the touch, her breathing shallow. He built up the fire higher and pulled her close to it, then set about rubbing her hands and feet, trying to restore circulation. Frostbite was a real concern. Her fingers and toes were white and waxy looking, but when he pressed on them, the color returned, which he took as a good sign. "Come on," he urged, still working her frozen limbs. "Come back. You fought this hard already. Don't give up now." It took nearly an hour before she showed signs of truly waking. First, a small moan escaped her lips, then her eyelids began to flutter. Lucas grabbed his canteen and wet a cloth, dabbing it against her lips. "Easy now," he said. "You're safe. You're inside and warm." Her eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then gradually sharpening. They were brown, he noticed, a warm amber brown that seemed to catch the firelight. She stared at him without comprehension for a long moment, then her gaze darted around the cabin, panic rising in her features. "It's all right," Lucas said quickly, keeping his voice calm and steady. "You're safe. I found you in the snow. You were nearly frozen. I brought you here to get you warm." She tried to speak, but her throat seemed too dry. He held the canteen to her lips, supporting her head as she took small sips. When she'd had enough, she pulled back slightly, her eyes never leaving his face. "Who are you?" Her voice was barely a whisper, rough and cracked. "Name's Lucas Whitmore. I'm a cowboy, been working down in Arizona. I was heading north when I found you. What's your name?" She was quiet for so long he thought maybe she wouldn't answer. Then, in that same whisper, "Natalie. Natalie Brooks." "Well, Miss Brooks, you're about the luckiest woman alive. Another hour in that cold and you wouldn't have made it. What were you doing out there without proper clothes?" Her eyes filled with tears then, and she turned her face away from him. Lucas felt a pang of guilt for pushing, but he needed to know if someone was looking for her, if there was danger nearby. "I ran," she said finally, her voice breaking. "I had to run." Lucas waited, giving her time. Outside, the wind had picked up, howling around the cabin like a living thing. Snow began to fall again, visible through the gaps in the shutters. "There was a man," Natalie continued, still not looking at him. "Mr. Garrett. He and his wife ran the orphanage where I lived. Mrs. Garrett died 3 months ago, and after that he changed. Started looking at me different, started saying things." Lucas felt his jaw tighten. He had a pretty good idea where this story was going. "Last night he came to my room. Said I owed him for all the years of food and shelter. Said I was old enough now that I should be grateful for his attention." She was shaking now, and Lucas couldn't tell if it was from the cold or the memory. "I fought him off and ran. Just grabbed what I could and ran into the storm. I thought I could make it to the next town, but I got turned around. Everything looked the same, all white. I kept walking because I knew if I stopped I'd die, but then I couldn't feel my feet anymore and I was so tired." "You did the right thing," Lucas said firmly. "Running was the right choice. And you're safe now. I give you my word on that." She finally looked at him again, searching his face for something. Whatever she found there must have satisfied her because some of the tension left her shoulders. "Where are your people?" Lucas asked gently. "Family who might be worried about you." "I'm an orphan. My parents died of fever when I was 8. I've been at the orphanage for 12 years. She paused, and he could see her doing the math in her head that he'd already done. 20 years old then. Young, but a woman grown. "No other family at all," she shook her head. "My father had a brother somewhere out in California, but I never met him. Don't even know if he's still alive." Lucas sat back on his heels, thinking. Outside, the storm was getting worse, the wind rattling the cabin's walls. They weren't going anywhere tonight, possibly not tomorrow either. And even when the storm cleared, what then? He couldn't just leave her alone. This Garrett character would be looking for her, and there was nowhere for her to go. "All right," he said, making a decision. "First thing is to get you fully warmed up and fed, then we'll figure out the rest. I've got some supplies in my saddlebags, jerky, hardtack, coffee, not much, but it'll keep us going." "I don't have any money," Natalie said quickly. "I can't pay you for your help." "Did I ask for payment?" Lucas stood and headed for the door. "Just sit tight. I need to tend to my horse and bring in the supplies." He stepped out into the storm, the cold hitting him like a physical blow after the warmth of the cabin. Copper was standing where he'd left her, head down against the wind. He led her around to the side of the cabin, where there was a lean-to that provided some shelter, unsaddled her, and rubbed her down as best he could with handfuls of dry hay he found stored there. She'd earned her oats today, and he made sure she got double rations along with water from the melted snow. When he came back inside with his saddlebags, Natalie had pulled the blanket more tightly around herself and was sitting up, closer to the fire. Her color was better, the blue tinge gone from her lips, though her face was still pale. The scratches stood out in stark relief across her cheek. Lucas set about making coffee, filling his battered tin pot with snow to melt and adding grounds once it boiled. The smell filled the small cabin, rich and comforting. He handed her a piece of jerky and some hardtack, apologizing for the meager fare. "It's more than I had yesterday," Natalie said, taking the food gratefully. She ate slowly, carefully, and Lucas realized she was probably half-starved. The orphanage clearly hadn't been feeding her well. They sat in silence for a while, the only sounds the crackling fire and the wind outside. Lucas found himself stealing glances at her. Even haggard and bruised as she was lovely in a quiet, understated way. She had a delicate bone structure, high cheekbones, and a stubborn chin that suggested strength beneath the fragility. Her hair, as it dried by the fire, proved to be a rich dark brown with hints of auburn in the firelight. "What were you doing in Montana?" Natalie asked suddenly. "You said you were working in Arizona." "My brother lives in Helena, runs a store there with his wife. I try to visit when I can, though the work keeps me moving around a lot. I've been on a ranch outside Gila Bend for the past half-year, but the owner gave everyone time off for the winter. Figured I'd head north, see my brother, maybe find work for the spring." "Gila Bend," Natalie repeated. "I've never been to Arizona. It's different from here. Hot and dry, mostly desert, beautiful in its own way, but nothing like these mountains." "Where are we exactly?" she asked. "About 20 miles northeast of a little settlement called Bear Creek. Not much there, just a trading post and a few houses. The orphanage you came from, where is it?" "Bear Creek," she said quietly. "The orphanage is just outside town. That's why I was trying to get away from the area. Mr. Garrett knows everyone there. He's on the town council, goes to church every Sunday. Everyone thinks he's such a good man." The bitterness in her voice was sharp enough to cut. Lucas felt anger rise in his chest. He'd met men like this Garrett before, men who hid behind respectability while doing terrible things. "How long has the orphanage been there?" 15 years, I think. He and his wife started it together. She was truly good, kind. She would never have let him." Natalie's voice caught. "I think that's why he waited until she was gone." "Are there other children there?" 3, 2 boys and a girl. They're younger, 10 and under. I tried to watch over them as best I could." Lucas was quiet, thinking about those children. If Garrett had set his sights on Natalie, what would happen to them, especially the girl, as they got older? But he couldn't rescue everyone, and right now his priority had to be the woman in front of him. "The storm should blow over by tomorrow afternoon if we're lucky," he said. "After that, we need to decide what to do. You can't go back to Bear Creek, that much is clear. Do you want to try to find your uncle in California?" Natalie shook her head. "I don't even know his name, not really. My father called him Junior, but that was just a nickname, and California is so far. I wouldn't even know where to start. I'm heading to Helena. My brother and his wife are good people. They might be able to help you find work, a place to stay. It's a real city, big enough that you could disappear if this Garrett comes looking. Why are you helping me?" The question was direct, her eyes searching his face. "You don't know me. For all you know, I could be lying about everything." Lucas considered this. "Are you lying?" "No, then that's why. Because you needed help and I was there to give it. Because leaving you in that snow would have made me no better than the man you ran from." He paused. "And maybe because I know what it's like to be alone in the world." Something shifted in her expression, a softening around her eyes. "You don't have family besides your brother." "Had a sister too, and my parents. Lost my parents to cholera in '72. My sister Martha died giving birth to her first child 5 years ago. The baby didn't make it either." The words still hurt, even after all this time. "So it's just me and Thomas now. That's my brother." "I'm sorry," Natalie said, and he could hear that she meant it. "Life in the West is hard. You learn to take the good when it comes and push through the bad." He stood and added more wood to the fire. "You should rest. I'll keep the fire going and keep watch. You're safe here." "Where will you sleep?" "I'll be fine. Done plenty of nights with less sleep and in worse conditions than this." But Natalie was already shaking her head. "That's not fair. You've been traveling for days and you saved my life. We can take turns keeping watch if you're worried about the fire." "Miss Brooks, I appreciate the offer, but it's just Natalie. And I insist, you rest first. I'm feeling much better now, and I slept so much while I was unconscious that I don't think I could sleep more if I tried." Lucas wanted to argue, but the truth was that he was bone tired. 3 days of hard riding and the stress of the last few hours had drained him more than he wanted to admit. "All right, but you wake me in a few hours, understood? And if you feel tired at all, don't fight it." She nodded, and he settled down on the floor near the fire, using his saddle as a pillow. The last thing he saw before exhaustion pulled him under was Natalie sitting by the fire, the blanket wrapped around her shoulders, staring into the flames with an expression he couldn't quite read. He woke to the smell of coffee and weak sunlight filtering through the cracks in the shutters. For a moment he was disoriented, then memory came flooding back. He sat up quickly, looking around for Natalie. She was right where he'd left her, though she'd added more wood to the fire and had somehow managed to make more coffee. She looked up when he moved, offering a small smile. "Good morning. I hope you don't mind. I used the last of the coffee grounds." Lucas stretched, his back protesting the hard floor. "How long was I out?" "About 5 hours. You were clearly exhausted. I tried to wake you earlier, but you were sleeping so soundly I didn't have the heart." He should have been annoyed that she'd let him sleep so long, but he felt more rested than he had in days. The storm had passed in the night, and though he could hear wind outside, it was no longer the furious howl of the blizzard. "I need to check on Copper and see what the conditions are like," he said, standing and working the kinks out of his shoulders. "Then we should talk about our next move." Outside, the world had been transformed. Snow lay deep across everything, pristine and white under a pale blue sky. The temperature had dropped even further, the kind of cold that burned in your lungs with each breath. Copper nickered when she saw him, and he was relieved to find her in good shape, though clearly ready to be moving again. When he came back inside, Natalie had put on her dress, which had dried by the fire overnight. It was wrinkled and still stained with dirt and blood, but at least it was dry. She'd done her best to finger-comb her hair, pulling it back from her face. "We need to get you proper clothes," Lucas said, assessing her worn dress and thin shawl. "That's not going to keep you warm for the journey to Helena. I told you, I don't have money, and I told you I didn't ask for any. Helena is about 4 days' ride from here in good conditions. With this snow, it might take us 6 or 7. That's assuming we can even make it through some of the passes." He paused, thinking. "There's a town called Silver Falls about a day's ride west of here. It's bigger than Bear Creek, has a proper general store. We can get you outfitted there. And if Mr. Garrett is looking for me, word travels in small towns. Silver Falls is far enough off the path between here and Bear Creek that I think we'll be safe, and we'll be careful. I'll do the talking." Natalie bit her lip, considering. "I don't like being in your debt like this." "Then don't think of it as a debt. Think of it as one person helping another." He softened his tone. "Look, I understand your pride, I do. But right now, practicality has to win out. You need warm clothes and food, and I can provide those things. Once we get to Helena, we'll figure out a way for you to earn your keep if that's what you want. Thomas always needs help at the store, but first we have to get there alive." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, thank you, Lucas." It was the first time she'd used his given name, and he found he liked the sound of it in her voice. They spent another hour in the cabin, eating the last of his supplies and making sure Natalie was strong enough for travel. The color had fully returned to her face, and though she was still far too thin, she moved with purpose and determination. She'd need that determination for the days ahead. Finally, they could delay no longer. Lucas saddled Copper and helped Natalie mount, then swung up behind her. She was tense at first, clearly uncomfortable with the closeness, but as they started moving, she relaxed slightly against him. The ride to Silver Falls was brutal. The snow was deep enough that Copper struggled in places, and they had to dismount and lead her through several drifts. Lucas kept his rifle ready, alert for any signs of trouble. They saw no one, though they passed evidence of others. Wagon tracks frozen in the snow, long since abandoned, a homestead with smoke rising from its chimney but far off the trail. They rode mostly in silence, broken occasionally by Lucas pointing out landmarks or Natalie asking questions about what lay ahead. He found himself enjoying her presence more than he'd expected. She didn't complain once, even though he knew she must have been cold and uncomfortable. She had grit, this woman, strength that went deeper than the physical. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold, Lucas spotted the buildings of Silver Falls in the distance. It was larger than he'd remembered, at least 40 or 50 structures clustered in a valley between two ridges. Smoke rose from multiple chimneys, and he could hear the faint sound of a piano playing as they drew closer. "We'll get you those supplies and then find a place to stay for the night," Lucas said. "A real bed in a real room will do us both good." "Separate rooms," Natalie said quickly. "Of course. I'll tell anyone who asks that you're my cousin, traveling to meet family in Helena. That should keep any gossip to a minimum." The general store was still open when they arrived, a weathered building with a false front and large windows displaying goods. Lucas helped Natalie down from the horse and tied Copper to the hitching post outside. Inside, the store was warm and cluttered with merchandise. Shelves lined every wall, stocked with everything from canned goods to farming equipment. A portly man with a magnificent mustache stood behind the counter, and he looked up with a welcoming smile as they entered. "Evening, folks. Something I can help you find. My cousin here needs a full outfitting," Lucas said, gesturing to Natalie. "Lost her trunk in a river crossing. Needs winter clothes, boots, everything." The shopkeeper's eyes widened slightly as he took in Natalie's bedraggled appearance, but to his credit, he didn't comment. "Well now, we can certainly help with that. Got a good selection of ladies' ready-made clothes in the back. Madam, if you'll follow me." Lucas waited while Natalie disappeared into the back of the store with the shopkeeper. He browsed the shelves, replenishing his supply of coffee, jerky, and hardtack. He added a proper cooking pot, some beans, flour, and salt pork. They'd need more substantial meals for the journey ahead. When Natalie emerged 20 minutes later, Lucas almost didn't recognize her. She wore a practical wool dress in a deep green that brought out the color in her eyes, topped with a heavy coat lined with fleece. Proper leather boots showed beneath her skirt hem, and she carried gloves and a knit hat. The shopkeeper followed her, carrying additional undergarments, stockings, and a second dress wrapped in brown paper. "Fits her perfect," the shopkeeper said proudly. "And I threw in a good wool scarf at no extra charge. Weather like this, folks need to look out for each other." Lucas paid for everything without blinking, though the total made a significant dent in his savings. Natalie's face was flushed with what might have been embarrassment or gratitude, possibly both. "There's a boarding house 2 streets over," the shopkeeper said as he wrapped their purchases. "Clean rooms, good food. Mrs. Henderson runs it. Tell her Frank sent you." They found the boarding house easily enough, a 2-story building with a welcoming front porch. Mrs. Henderson turned out to be a tiny woman with steel-gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She looked between Lucas and Natalie with obvious curiosity, but asked no intrusive questions, simply showing them to 2 rooms on the 2nd floor and informing them that dinner would be served in an hour. Lucas took the time to wash up and change into his spare shirt, beating the dust and snow from his clothes as best he could. When he came down to the dining room, Natalie was already there, seated at a long table. She'd braided her hair and pinned it up, and in her new clothes, with her face cleaned of dirt and scratches, she looked like a different person. Several other boarders were present, mostly men who appeared to be miners or ranch hands, and Lucas noticed more than one appreciative glance thrown Natalie's way. He took the seat beside her, close enough to make it clear they were together. Mrs. Henderson served up a hearty meal of beef stew, fresh bread, and apple pie that tasted like heaven after days of trail food. Conversation flowed around the table, talk of weather and prospects, mine yields and cattle prices. No one paid them special attention, and Lucas began to relax slightly. After dinner, he and Natalie moved to the boarding house's small parlor, where a fire burned in the hearth. The other boarders had dispersed to their rooms or to the saloon down the street, leaving them alone. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you for all this," Natalie said quietly, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee. "The clothes, the food, the room, it's too much." "We've been over this," Lucas said, but not unkindly. "You'll pay me back by getting to Helena safely and building yourself a good life there. That's all the repayment I need." "Why do you care so much? You don't even know me." Lucas considered the question seriously. Why did he care? There was something about this woman that had gotten under his skin from the moment he'd seen her in the snow. Maybe it was the courage it had taken to run into a blizzard rather than submit to abuse. Maybe it was the way she'd insisted on taking her turn keeping watch last night, not content to be just a damsel in distress. Maybe it was simply that he'd been alone for so long that having someone to care for again felt right in a way he couldn't fully articulate. "I've spent the last few years just drifting," he said finally. "Working here and there, moving on when the mood struck. It's been a lonely kind of life, if I'm honest. Finding you yesterday, having someone to help, someone who needs me. It reminded me that there's more to living than just getting through each day." Natalie looked at him with those warm brown eyes, and something passed between them, an understanding that went deeper than words. "I've felt alone my whole life," she said. "Even at the orphanage, surrounded by people. It was like watching life happen from behind glass, never really part of it. And then last night, when you said I wasn't alone, when you wrapped me in your coat and held me, that was the first time I felt truly connected to another person in more years than I can count. You're a strong woman, Natalie Brooks, stronger than you probably know. You're going to do just fine in Helena. My sister-in-law Hannah is going to love you. She's always going on about how the town needs more good women, more decent folk to balance out all the roughnecks and fortune seekers. Tell me about her, about your brother." So Lucas did. He told her about Thomas, who was 5 years younger and had always been the smart one, the one who preferred books to horses. He described how Thomas had met Hannah at a church social in Helena 3 years ago, how she'd been a schoolteacher from back east who'd come west looking for adventure. He talked about their store, a tidy operation that sold everything from dress fabric to mining equipment, and how they'd built a good life together. Natalie listened intently, asking questions, laughing at his stories about Thomas's early attempts at ranching before he'd admitted defeat and opened the store instead. In turn, she told him about her own life, painting pictures of the orphanage before Mrs. Garrett died, the small joys and larger sorrows that had shaped her. She spoke of books she'd read, borrowed from Mrs. Garrett's small library, dreams of travel she'd never thought she'd realize. The fire burned low, and Mrs. Henderson appeared to pointedly wind the parlor clock, a clear signal that it was time for bed. Lucas and Natalie climbed the stairs together, pausing outside her door. "Thank you again," she said, "for everything. Get some rest, we'll leave at first light. The weather's supposed to hold clear for a few days, which will help." She nodded, then on impulse reached out and squeezed his hand. The touch was brief, but it sent warmth through him that had nothing to do with the fire downstairs. "Good night, Lucas." "Good night, Natalie." He waited until she was safely in her room before heading to his own. As he lay in the comfortable bed, so different from the hard cabin floor or bedroll he was used to, Lucas found himself thinking about the days ahead. 6 or 7 days of travel with Natalie. 6 or 7 days of her riding in front of him, of making camp together, of those quiet conversations by the fire. The thought made him smile in the darkness. They left Silver Falls just as the sun was rising, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold. Natalie looked rested, her new coat buttoned tight against the cold, the knit hat pulled down over her ears. Lucas had purchased a pair of saddlebags to carry their new supplies, distributing the weight evenly on Copper's back. The first few hours of riding were quiet, both of them settling into the rhythm of travel. The trail north was more established here, and they made good time despite the snow. They passed other travelers heading south, exchanging waves and occasional warnings about trail conditions ahead. Around midday, they stopped to rest and eat. Lucas built a small fire and made coffee while Natalie unpacked the cold biscuits and salt pork they'd brought from the boarding house. As they ate, a rider approached from the south, a young man on a paint horse who looked to be in a hurry. "Afternoon," the rider called out, slowing as he reached their camp. "You folks heading north?" "Helena," Lucas confirmed. "You, Bear Creek, I'm the deputy there." He tipped his hat to Natalie. "Madam, say, you wouldn't have passed anyone unusual on the trail, would you?" "We're looking for a young woman who went missing a few days ago. Ran off from the orphanage." Lucas felt Natalie tense beside him, but he kept his expression neutral. "Haven't seen anyone. It's been pretty quiet. What happened? Not rightly sure." "Mr. Garrett, he runs the orphanage, says the girl had some problems. A little touched in the head, if you know what I mean. He's worried she'll freeze to death out in this weather. We've been searching for 2 days now, but no sign of her." "That's unfortunate," Lucas said carefully. "We'll keep an eye out. What's she look like?" The deputy described someone who could have been Natalie or could have been any young woman with dark hair. The description was vague enough to be useless, which Lucas suspected was intentional. If Garrett was as respected as Natalie had said, the deputy probably wasn't questioning his story too closely. "If we see anything, we'll report it when we reach Helena," Lucas promised. The deputy nodded and rode on, clearly eager to be out of the cold. Lucas waited until he was well out of sight before turning to Natalie. "He's telling them I'm crazy," she said, her voice shaking with anger. "Of course he is. That way, if anyone finds me and I tell the truth, they won't believe me." "I believe you," Lucas said firmly. "And we're going to make sure you get somewhere safe. But we need to be more careful now. They're actively searching, which means we can't take the main trail all the way to Helena. There are back roads, hunters' trails. They'll add time to our journey, but they'll keep us away from anyone else looking for you. I'm sorry I've put you in this position. You haven't put me anywhere I didn't choose to be. Now come on, we need to put more distance between us and that deputy before we make camp tonight." They rode hard for the rest of the day, leaving the main trail and cutting through the forest on paths that were barely visible beneath the snow. Lucas knew this country reasonably well from previous trips, and he guided Copper with confidence through the trees. Natalie held on without complaint, though he knew the rough terrain must have been uncomfortable. As darkness fell, they made camp in a small hollow protected by a ring of pine trees. Lucas built a fire and set up his small tent, insisting that Natalie take it while he slept under the stars. She argued, but he was firm, and eventually she relented. They made dinner together, working in companionable silence. Natalie proved surprisingly capable at camp cooking, turning their basic supplies into a decent meal of beans and salt pork with pan bread cooked over the fire. They ate as stars emerged overhead, brilliant in the clear, cold night. "I used to love looking at the stars," Natalie said, gazing upward. "At the orphanage, I'd sneak out sometimes and just lie in the grass watching them. It made me feel less trapped, knowing there was so much universe out there beyond my little world." "My father taught me the constellations when I was a boy," Lucas said. "See there, that's Orion. The 3 stars in a row are his belt. And that bright one, the red one, that's Betelgeuse, his shoulder." He pointed out other constellations, telling her their stories, and she listened with rapt attention. When he ran out of star lore, they fell into conversation about other things. Their favorite foods, places they'd like to see, memories from childhood. The easy intimacy of it surprised Lucas. He'd known this woman for barely 2 days, yet he felt more comfortable with her than he had with most people he'd known for years. "Can I ask you something personal?" Natalie said eventually, "Of course. Have you ever been in love?" "Been married?" Lucas was quiet for a moment. "Came close once. Her name was Sarah. This was back in '76 when I was working on a ranch outside Cheyenne. She was the foreman's daughter and we courted for about 6 months. I thought we'd marry, start a life together. But then her father died in a riding accident and her mother decided to move back east to live with family. Sarah wanted me to come with her, but I couldn't see myself living in some crowded city, working in a factory or office. I'm a Western man for better or worse. So she left and I stayed and that was that. Do you regret it? Sometimes. Not the choice so much as the loss. It's been lonely since then. I've met other women here and there, but nothing that stuck. What about you? Any young men at the orphanage or in town catch your eye? Natalie gave a bitter laugh. Mr. Garrett made sure no young men came near me. He said it was to protect my virtue, but I think now he just didn't want competition. There was one boy, the blacksmith's apprentice. His name was Daniel. He used to smile at me when I went to town for supplies, but Mr. Garrett saw us talking once and forbade me from going to the smithy again, sent one of the younger children instead. That's a sad way to live. It was the only way I knew, until I ran. She turned to look at him, her face serious in the firelight. You saved my life, Lucas. But you did more than that. You saved me from a life that wasn't really living at all. However this turns out, whatever happens when we get to Helena, I want you to know I'll always be grateful for that. It's going to turn out fine, Lucas said, though he wasn't entirely sure he believed it. There were so many things that could go wrong. But he needed her to have hope, so he gave it to her. You'll start over in Helena. Find work, make friends, build the life you should have had all along. She smiled at him, and his heart did something strange in his chest. The days that followed developed their own rhythm. Wake before dawn, break camp, ride through country that grew more rugged and beautiful with each passing mile. They stayed off the main roads, following game trails and old mining tracks that wound through the mountains. The going was slow, but they saw no one, which was what mattered. Each night they made camp and fell into an easy routine. Lucas would tend to copper while Natalie got the fire started. They'd cook together, sharing stories and observations about the day. Then they'd sit by the fire, sometimes talking, sometimes comfortable in silence, until exhaustion claimed them both. Lucas found himself looking forward to those evening hours more than anything else. Natalie was easy to talk to, with a quick mind and a dry sense of humor that caught him off guard. She asked thoughtful questions about his life, genuinely interested in his work and travels. In turn, she shared more about herself, her hopes and fears, the small dreams she'd kept locked away during her years at the orphanage. On the fourth night, they camped beside a half-frozen stream, the water chattering over rocks as it flowed. Natalie had gone down to the stream to wash up, and when she came back, her hair was loose around her shoulders, drying in waves from its usual braid. Lucas looked up from the fire and felt his breath catch. "What?" she asked, self-conscious under his gaze. "Nothing. Just, you should wear your hair down more often. It suits you." She blushed and looked away, but he saw the small smile that played at her lips. That night, as they sat by the fire, Natalie shifted closer to him. The temperature had dropped sharply with the setting sun, and even with the fire, the cold was biting. Without thinking, Lucas put his arm around her shoulders, sharing his warmth. She stiffened for just a moment, then relaxed against him with a small sigh. "Is this all right?" he asked, suddenly worried he'd overstepped. "Yes," she said quietly. "It's more than all right." They sat like that for a long time, watching the fire burn down to embers. Lucas was acutely aware of her presence, the weight of her against his side, the faint scent of pine and smoke in her hair. When she finally pulled away to go to bed, he felt the loss like a physical thing. As he lay in his bedroll later, staring up at the stars, Lucas had to acknowledge what he'd been trying to ignore for days. He was falling for Natalie Brooks. Falling hard and fast in a way he'd never experienced before, not even with Sarah. It was more than just attraction, though that was certainly there. It was the way she made him laugh, the strength he saw in her, the resilience, the gentleness she showed when tending to copper each evening. The way she looked at him sometimes, like he was someone special, someone worth knowing. But what future could they have? He was a drifter, a cowboy who'd spent years moving from job to job with no real roots anywhere. She was a woman who'd been through hell, who needed stability and safety, not more uncertainty. The best thing he could do for her was get her to Helena, help her get settled, and then step back. Let her build the life she deserved without being weighed down by his feelings. The thought made him ache, but he knew it was right. They reached the outskirts of Helena 2 days later in the late afternoon. The city sprawled across a mountain valley, larger and more prosperous than any town they'd passed through. Buildings of brick and stone lined wide streets, and Lucas could see church steeples, business signs, the busy activity of a thriving community. Natalie stared at it all with wide eyes. "It's so big." "About 4,000 people at last count," Lucas said. "It's a real city, not just some mining camp that sprang up overnight. Thomas's store is on Main Street, right in the center of things." As they rode into town, Lucas felt a strange reluctance settling over him. This was it. Once he delivered Natalie to Thomas and Hannah, once he knew she was safe and settled, there'd be no reason for him to stay. He'd find work somewhere, move on like he always did. But the thought of leaving her behind sat in his gut like a stone. They found the store easily enough, a well-built structure with large glass windows displaying goods. The sign above the door read, "Whitmore and Company, General Merchandise." Lucas helped Natalie down from Copper and tied the horse to the rail outside. "Ready?" he asked. She nodded, but he could see the nervousness in her eyes. He wanted to take her hand to reassure her, but he held back. Instead, he just offered her an encouraging smile and opened the door. The store was busy with afternoon customers, and Lucas spotted his brother immediately behind the counter. Thomas had always looked younger than his years, but at 27 he'd filled out some, grown a neat beard that made him look more mature. His face split into a wide grin when he saw Lucas. "Well, I'll be damned. Lucas." He came around the counter and pulled Lucas into a bear hug. "We'd about given up on you. Hannah was convinced you'd gotten snowed in somewhere." "It was a near thing," Lucas admitted. "Thomas, there's someone I want you to meet. This is Natalie Brooks. She's had some trouble, and I was hoping you and Hannah might be able to help her get settled here in Helena." Thomas's smile dimmed slightly as he took in Natalie's appearance and Lucas's serious tone, but he extended his hand with genuine warmth. "Miss Brooks, any friend of my brother's is welcome here. Let me get one of the boys to watch the store and we'll go up to the house. Hannah will want to meet you both." The house was a neat 2-story structure just a block from the store, painted white with blue shutters. Hannah Whitmore met them at the door, a petite blonde woman with a quick smile and kind eyes. She took one look at Natalie and immediately drew her inside. "Lucas Whitmore, you bring this poor frozen girl to my door and expect her to stand in the cold making introductions. Come in, come in." "Natalie, is it? You look like you could use some hot tea and a comfortable chair." Within minutes, they were all seated in the warm parlor, cups of tea in hand, while Hannah fussed over Natalie and demanded to know the whole story. Lucas let Natalie tell it in her own words, watching as Thomas's expression grew darker with each detail. "That bastard," Thomas said when she'd finished. "Pardon my language, but that's what he is, and he's got the law looking for you." "He's telling people I'm mentally unstable," Natalie said. "That I ran away in some kind of fit. If they find me, they'll take me back to him." "Not if we have anything to say about it," Hannah said firmly. "You're 20 years old, a woman grown. He has no legal claim on you. And even if he did, what you've described is assault, or attempted assault at the very least. No judge would send you back to that." "In a perfect world, maybe," Lucas said. "But if this Garrett is as well connected as Natalie says, he might be able to cause trouble. The safest thing is for her to stay out of sight for a while, establish herself here as a resident of Helena. After enough time passes, even if he does track her here, it'll be clear she's built a life and has community support." "Agreed," Thomas said. "And as it happens, we could use help at the store. One of our clerks just left to get married. The job is yours if you want it, Miss Brooks. Room and board included. We've got a spare room upstairs you can use until you're earning enough to find your own place." Natalie's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know what to say. You don't even know me." "We know you're important to Lucas, and that's enough for us," Hannah said, reaching over to pat her hand. "Besides, I could use another woman around here. I'm drowning in a sea of masculine opinions, and I need an ally." Everyone laughed, and the tension in the room eased. They spent the next hour making plans, discussing what Natalie's duties at the store would be, showing her the room where she'd stay. It was small but comfortable, with a real bed and a window that looked out over the street. When it was time for Lucas to leave, heading to the boarding house where he'd stay while in town, Natalie walked him to the door. They stood on the porch, the evening air cold around them. "Thank you doesn't seem like enough," she said. "You don't need to thank me. I'm just glad you're safe now. Thomas and Hannah are good people. They'll look after you. What about you? What will you do?" Lucas shrugged, trying to keep his tone light. "Same as always, find work, move on when the season changes. There are several ranches in the area that might need hands come spring." Something flickered in her eyes, an emotion he couldn't quite read. "Will you stay in Helena? At least for a while, for a bit," he said, because he couldn't bring himself to say no when she looked at him like that. "Long enough to make sure you're settled." She reached out and took his hand, squeezing it gently. "I'll see you tomorrow then. You'll come to the store. I'll come to the store." He forced himself to let go of her hand and walk away, but he felt her eyes on him until he turned the corner. The next few weeks fell into a new pattern. Lucas found work at a ranch outside town, day labor that paid well enough and kept him busy. But every afternoon, he'd ride into Helena and stop by the store, ostensibly to visit Thomas but really to see Natalie. She thrived in her new environment. With regular meals, she'd lost the gaunt look, and color had returned to her cheeks. She took to the work at the store naturally, quickly learning the stock and developing an easy rapport with customers. Hannah declared her a godsend, praising her efficiency and pleasant manner. But it was the way she lit up when Lucas came through the door each day that kept him coming back. She'd look up from whatever she was doing, and her whole face would transform with a smile that made his heart race. They'd talk while she worked, catching up on their days, sharing small observations and jokes that made sense only to them. One Saturday afternoon in early March, nearly 2 months after they'd arrived in Helena, Lucas came to the store to find it unusually quiet. Thomas was in the back doing inventory, and Hannah had gone to visit a friend. Natalie was alone behind the counter, working on the account books. "Slow day?" Lucas asked, leaning against the counter. "Very. I think everyone's enjoying the warmer weather. Spring is coming early this year." She set down her pencil and looked at him. "Lucas, can I ask you something, always? Why haven't you left yet? You said you'd stay long enough to make sure I was settled. That was weeks ago. I'm clearly settled. Thomas and Hannah have been wonderful. I love the work. I've even made friends in town. So why are you still here?" The question caught him off guard, though he supposed he should have expected it. He'd been asking himself the same thing for weeks now, though he'd been avoiding the answer. "I guess I'm not ready to move on yet," he said carefully. "Is it because of me?" There was no point lying to her. "Yes." She came around the counter, standing close enough that he could smell the lavender soap she used. "I'm glad, because I'm not ready for you to leave either." "Natalie, I'm just a drifter. I don't have anything to offer you. No home, no prospects beyond the next job. You deserve someone stable, someone who can give you the life you should have had all along. You saved my life. You kept me safe, got me here, gave me a chance at a future." "That's not nothing, Lucas. That's everything." She took a breath, and he saw her gathering courage. "And somewhere along the way, during those days on the trail, sitting by the fire at night, I fell in love with you. I tried not to, because I knew you'd just leave like you're talking about now. But I couldn't help it. Lucas felt like the ground had shifted beneath his feet. You love me. Yes, and I think you love me too, or you wouldn't still be here. So stop talking about what I deserve and tell me what you want, what he wanted. God, what didn't he want? He wanted to wake up next to her every morning. He wanted to build a life with her, a real life with roots and purpose. He wanted to stop drifting and finally come home. I want you, he said, the words rough in his throat. I've wanted you since that first night by the fire when you insisted on taking watch. I've wanted you every day since, and it's been driving me crazy because I didn't think I had the right to feel this way. Why not? Because I'm 12 years older than you. Because you've been through so much trauma. Because you should have time to figure out who you are and what you want without some cowboy complicating things. I am 20 years old, Lucas, not a child. I know my own mind, and what I want is you. If you want me too, then stop making excuses and do something about it. So he did. He closed the distance between them and kissed her, pouring weeks of pent-up longing into it. She kissed him back with equal fervor, her arms winding around his neck, and Lucas felt something settle in his chest, some restless part of him finally finding peace. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Natalie was smiling. It took you long enough. I'm an idiot. Yes, but you're my idiot now. Lucas laughed and kissed her again, softer this time, savoring it. When Thomas cleared his throat from the back room doorway, they sprang apart like guilty teenagers. About time, Thomas said, grinning. Hannah owes me $5. She bet it would take you another week to figure things out. You were betting on us, Lucas asked, not sure whether to be embarrassed or amused. Everyone could see it except you two. The way you look at each other, it's been obvious since the day you arrived. Thomas came forward and clapped Lucas on the shoulder. So, brother, I assume this means you're staying in Helena. Lucas looked at Natalie, saw the hope in her eyes, and knew his drifting days were over. Yeah, I'm staying, if I can find steady work around here. I've been meaning to talk to you about that. Business has been good, really good. I need a partner, someone to handle the outdoor goods and equipment side of things while I focus on dry goods and supplies. You know ranching, you know what cowboys and prospectors need. What do you say? Want to go into business with your brother? It was an answer to a question Lucas hadn't even known he was asking. A real future, right here in Helena, with his brother and the woman he loved. I say yes. The wedding took place on a warm day in May, with wildflowers blooming across the hillsides and the last traces of winter snow melted away. Hannah had helped Natalie make a dress of cream-colored silk, simple but elegant, and she carried a bouquet of spring flowers that Thomas had ordered from a grower down in Butte. The ceremony was held in the small church on the edge of town, with about 50 guests in attendance. As Lucas stood at the altar watching Natalie walk down the aisle, he thought back to that day in the snow when he'd found her nearly frozen. If he'd ridden past that trail of blood, if he'd decided not to investigate, neither of them would be standing here now. Sometimes the best things in life came from the chances you took, the moments when you chose to stop and help even when it would be easier to keep moving. Natalie reached him and took his hands, her smile radiant. The minister began the ceremony, but Lucas barely heard the words. He was too focused on the woman in front of him, this strong, resilient, beautiful person who'd chosen to share her life with him. When it came time for the vows, he spoke from the heart. Natalie, you've taught me that home isn't a place, it's a person. It's you. I promise to stand by you, to support your dreams, to make you laugh, and to love you with everything I have for all the days of my life. Her eyes shimmered with tears as she gave her own vows. Lucas, you saved me in more ways than one. You showed me that I deserved better, that I was worth fighting for. You gave me hope when I had none and love when I'd given up believing in it. I promise to be your partner, your friend, your home. I promise to love you fiercely and faithfully forever." The kiss that sealed their marriage was sweet and full of promise. As they turned to face their friends and family, Lucas felt complete in a way he'd never experienced before. They walked back down the aisle together, hand in hand, ready to begin their life together. The reception was held at the store, which they'd closed for the day and decorated with ribbons and flowers. There was music and dancing, food and drink, toasts and laughter. Thomas gave a speech that had everyone either laughing or crying, often both. Hannah's eyes were bright with happy tears as she hugged them both. As the sun set and the party began to wind down, Lucas and Natalie slipped away to the house they'd been preparing. It was a small place just a few blocks from the store, nothing fancy but sturdy and warm, with 2 bedrooms and a kitchen big enough for a proper table. They'd spent the last month fixing it up, painting walls and hanging curtains, choosing furniture and making it theirs. Lucas carried Natalie over the threshold, making her laugh, then set her down gently in the parlor. The house was quiet after the noise of the reception, intimate in the lamplight. "Hello, husband," Natalie said, reaching up to loosen his tie. "Hello, wife," he replied, pulling her close. They made love that night with tenderness and passion, learning each other's bodies, exploring and discovering. Afterward, they lay tangled together in their marriage bed, talking quietly about their hopes for the future. "I want children," Natalie said, tracing patterns on his chest. "I spent so many years taking care of orphans at the orphanage. I'd like to have my own family if we're blessed with children." "I'd like that too," Lucas said, kissing the top of her head. "A whole houseful if we're lucky. What about the business? You and Thomas have been working so hard to build it up. The business will be fine. We'll hire help when we need it. Family comes first." She snuggled closer and he felt her smile against his skin. "I love you, Lucas Whitmore. I love you too, Natalie Whitmore." The first year of their marriage was one of adjustment and growth. The partnership with Thomas flourished and they expanded the store, adding a second room dedicated to mining and ranching equipment. Lucas found he had a knack for business, and more importantly, he enjoyed it. He liked helping customers find what they needed, liked the satisfaction of seeing the shelves stocked and organized. But the best part of each day was coming home to Natalie. She'd continued working at the store for a few months after the wedding, but had eventually decided to focus on their home and pursue her love of reading by organizing a small library in their parlor. She began offering reading lessons to children in the evenings, something that brought her immense joy. In the spring of their second year together, Natalie told Lucas she was pregnant. He'd whooped with joy and picked her up, spinning her around despite her protests that he'd make her dizzy. Thomas and Hannah were equally thrilled, already making plans for how they'd spoil their niece or nephew. The pregnancy was not easy. Natalie suffered from terrible morning sickness in the early months, and later, as she grew larger, she struggled with exhaustion and swollen feet. Lucas hovered anxiously, driving her crazy with his constant concern, until she finally told him to either stop treating her like spun glass or sleep in the spare room. "I'm pregnant, not dying," she said with exasperation. "Women have been doing this since the beginning of time. I'm perfectly capable of walking to the market without you acting like I might shatter." "I just worry," Lucas said, chastened, her expression softened. "I know, and I love you for it, but you have to trust that I'll tell you if I need help." He tried to back off, really he did, but it was hard. The thought of losing her, of something going wrong, terrified him in a way he'd never experienced. She was his whole world now, and the baby was a part of that world too. In late November, as winter was beginning to settle over Montana once again, Natalie went into labor. Lucas paced the parlor while Hannah and the midwife attended to his wife, listening to the sounds from the bedroom and feeling utterly helpless. Thomas sat with him, offering words of encouragement that Lucas barely heard. Labor lasted nearly 20 hours, and Lucas aged years in that time. Every cry of pain from Natalie tore at him, made him want to burst through the door and demand they do something, anything. But Hannah kept him firmly out of the room, insisting that the birth was progressing normally and that Natalie was strong. Finally, just after dawn, a baby's cry pierced the air. Lucas was on his feet instantly, and moments later Hannah opened the door, her face weary but happy. "You have a son," she said, "and Natalie is fine, tired but fine. Come meet your boy." Lucas entered the bedroom on shaking legs. Natalie was propped up against pillows, her hair dark with sweat, her face pale but radiant. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. She looked up as Lucas approached, and the love in her eyes nearly undid him. "Meet your son," she said softly. Lucas sat carefully on the edge of the bed and looked down at the baby. He was red and wrinkled and impossibly small, with a shock of dark hair and tiny fists that waved in the air. He was the most beautiful thing Lucas had ever seen. "He's perfect," Lucas whispered, touching one tiny hand with his finger. The baby's fingers closed around his, and Lucas felt his heart expand in a way he hadn't known was possible. "We should name him," Natalie said. "I was thinking, if you agree, we could name him Thomas after your brother. He's been so good to us." "Thomas Lucas Whitmore," Lucas said, testing it out. I like it a lot." "Thomas it is then." Natalie shifted the baby slightly. "Do you want to hold him?" Lucas took his son carefully, cradling him against his chest. The baby made small snuffling sounds, his eyes closed, completely trusting. Looking down at him, Lucas made a silent promise. He would protect this child, give him everything he'd never had, raise him to be strong and kind and good. He would be the father he'd always wished his own father had lived long enough to fully be. "Hello, Thomas," he murmured. "Welcome to the world, son." The years that followed were full and rich. Young Thomas grew into a curious, energetic boy who loved horses, and could usually be found either at the store helping his father or exploring the hills around Helena with friends. When he was 3, Natalie gave birth to a daughter, Emma, who had her mother's brown eyes and her father's stubborn streak. 2 years after that came another son, William, quiet and thoughtful, who preferred books to adventure. The store continued to thrive, becoming one of the most successful businesses in Helena. Lucas and Thomas hired additional staff, including 2 young men who proved reliable and hardworking. This allowed Lucas to spend more time with his growing family, something he never took for granted. Natalie's reading lessons had evolved into a small school that she ran from their house, teaching not just children but adults who'd never learned to read. She had a gift for patience and instruction, and Lucas was endlessly proud of the difference she made in people's lives. They faced challenges, of course. There was a bad winter in '89 when the store's roof partially collapsed under heavy snow, requiring expensive repairs. Young Thomas broke his arm falling from a tree and scared them both half to death. Emma came down with scarlet fever at age 5, and for 3 terrifying days they thought they might lose her. But they weathered each storm together, their love and partnership only growing stronger. Lucas would sometimes think back to his days of drifting from job to job, never putting down roots, and wonder how he'd ever lived that way. This life, with its daily routines and small joys and occasional heartaches, was everything he'd never known he wanted. One night in the spring of 1894, 10 years after that day in the snow, Lucas and Natalie sat on their porch watching the sunset. The children were inside, supposedly getting ready for bed, though Lucas suspected Thomas was reading adventure stories to his younger siblings instead of sleeping. "You ever think about that day?" Natalie asked, her hand in his. "The day you found me." "All the time," Lucas admitted. "It was the day my life really began, though I didn't know it then. I was so scared. I thought I was going to die in that snow, and honestly, part of me was ready for it. I was so tired of fighting, of being afraid. And then you were there, telling me I wasn't alone. You gave me hope when I had none left. You gave me purpose," Lucas said. "You made me want to be better, to stop drifting and build something real. You made me a home." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "We made each other a home." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky fade from pink to purple to deep blue. Inside, they could hear the children laughing, and Lucas felt a contentment so profound it made his chest ache. "I'm glad you followed that blood trail," Natalie said softly. "So am I. Best decision I ever made." As stars began to emerge overhead, the same stars Lucas had shown Natalie during those nights on the trail so long ago, he counted his blessings. A wife he loved with his whole heart. 3 healthy, happy children. A thriving business and a good relationship with his brother. A community where he belonged. It was more than he'd ever dreamed of having. And it had all started with a choice to stop, to help someone in need, to offer hope when hope seemed lost. Young Thomas appeared at the door, interrupting his thoughts. "Papa, Emma says you promised to tell us the story of how you and Mama met. Will you tell it now?" Lucas looked at Natalie, who smiled and nodded. "All right, go get your brother and sister and we'll tell you the story." The children settled on the porch, Emma on Natalie's lap and the boys on either side of Lucas. He began the tale, editing out the darker parts for their young ears, focusing instead on the adventure of it all. The storm, the cabin, the journey to Helena. The children listened with rapt attention, even though they'd heard the story many times before. And then Mama started working at the store, and Uncle Thomas and Aunt Hannah helped us get married, and then we had you, Lucas concluded, ruffling Thomas's hair. "Tell the best part," Emma demanded. "The part where you saw Mama and knew she was special." "Well now, that's easy. The best part was when I opened my eyes one morning and saw your Mama making coffee by the fire, and I realized I'd been looking for her my whole life without knowing it. She was brave and strong and beautiful, and I knew right then that if I was lucky enough for her to love me back, I'd be the most fortunate man alive." Natalie's eyes sparkled with tears. "And are you the most fortunate man alive?" Lucas looked around at his family, at the life they'd built together, at the love that surrounded them. "Without a doubt." As the children drifted off to bed one by one, and Lucas and Natalie remained on the porch under the stars, he thought about all the roads he'd traveled before that January day in Montana. Every choice, every job, every mile had led him to that clearing where he'd found Natalie in the snow. If he'd taken any other path, made any different decision, they might never have met. It was a humbling thought, how much of life came down to chance and timing and being in the right place at exactly the right moment. "What are you thinking about?" Natalie asked. "How everything led to you." "How I'd do it all again, every hard year, every lonely night, if it meant I'd end up right here with you." She turned in his arms and kissed him, soft and sweet and full of love. "We're going to grow old together, you and I. We're going to watch our children grow up and have children of their own. We're going to sit on this porch when we're ancient and gray, holding hands and counting our blessings." "I'm counting them now," Lucas said. "And you're at the top of the list." They went inside as the last light faded from the sky, checking on the sleeping children before retiring to their own room. As Lucas held his wife in the darkness, listening to her breathe, he felt peace settle over him like a blanket. The years continued to pass, bringing changes and challenges, joys and sorrows. Thomas grew into a fine young man who took over much of the day-to-day running of the store, showing the same head for business his uncle had. Emma proved to have her mother's gift for teaching and began helping with the school. William, surprisingly, developed a passion for medicine after the town doctor let him shadow during rounds, and Lucas and Natalie began saving to send him to medical school back east. In the spring of 1904, 20 years after that fateful day in the snow, Lucas and Natalie celebrated their 19th wedding anniversary. They were both 44 now, graying at the temples and carrying a few more lines on their faces, but their love had only deepened with time. The anniversary dinner was held at the store, which Thomas had closed for the evening. All their children were there, along with extended family and close friends. Uncle Thomas, now 52 and still running strong despite Hannah's constant nagging about him slowing down, gave a toast that had everyone laughing and crying. To my brother Lucas, who was lost until he found Natalie. And to Natalie, who was lost until Lucas found her. To two people who were brave enough to trust in love when it would have been easier to walk away. May you have many more years of happiness together. As glasses clinked and people cheered, Lucas caught Natalie's eye across the room. She smiled at him, that same smile that had captured his heart so many years ago, and mouthed the words, "I love you." He mouthed them back, and in that moment, surrounded by family and friends, celebrating 2 decades of marriage and a lifetime of love, Lucas Whitmore knew he was truly blessed. The scared young woman he'd found half frozen in the snow had become his whole world. She'd given him a home, a family, a reason to wake up grateful every single morning, and he'd given her safety, love, and the freedom to become the woman she was always meant to be. Together, they'd built something beautiful and lasting, something that would endure long after they were gone through their children and grandchildren, and the legacy of love they'd leave behind. As the party wound down and they prepared to head home, Lucas took Natalie's hand and led her outside for a moment alone. The night was clear, stars brilliant overhead, and Helena spread out below them, lights twinkling in windows across the city. "Happy anniversary, my love," he said, pulling her close. "Happy anniversary," she replied, resting her head on his shoulder. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day, when you woke me up?" I said, "You're not alone." I haven't been alone a single day since. Thank you for that. Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible, for hearing me when no one else listened, for loving me when I didn't think I deserved love. You always deserved love, Lucas said fiercely. You deserved the world, and I've spent every day trying to give it to you. You've given me everything that matters. You've given me a family, a home, a life worth living. You've given me happiness I never dreamed possible. They stood there under the stars, holding each other close, two people who'd found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances and built something extraordinary together. Their story had started with blood in the snow and a desperate flight from danger. But it had become a testament to the power of compassion, the strength of love, and the beautiful things that could grow when two wounded souls chose to heal together. As they walked home through the quiet streets of Helena, hand in hand, Lucas thought about that day 20 years ago when he'd made the choice to follow that trail through the snow. It had seemed like a small decision at the time, barely worth considering, but it had changed everything. Because sometimes the biggest moments in life started with the smallest choices. Sometimes all it took was deciding to stop, to look, to care. Sometimes a life could turn on a single moment of kindness, a simple decision to help someone in need. Lucas had woken Natalie in the snow and told her she wasn't alone. In doing so, he'd ensured that neither of them would ever be alone again. They'd found each other in the wilderness and had been finding each other every day since, in the small moments and the large ones, in the easy times and the hard ones. Their love story wasn't the stuff of dime novels or grand romance. It was quieter than that, more real. It was built on trust and respect, on partnership and friendship, on the decision to show up for each other day after day, year after year. It was built on the promise they'd made to each other, first in the cabin and later at the altar and every day since. The promise to be there, to stay, to love. And as they climbed the steps to their porch and went inside to their home, their family, their life together, Lucas knew with absolute certainty that he'd kept that promise. They both had, and they always would, for all the days and years yet to come. The story that had begun in the snow had become a love that would last a lifetime. And if Lucas had his way, it would last beyond that, echoing through the generations, a testament to the fact that sometimes the best things in life come when you're brave enough to say to someone in need, "You're not alone."